"You need to leave, Mom. This is my house now," he said, not looking me in the eyes. That was how it began. Not with a discussion, not with a warning, not even with anger, just a sentence, delivered cold as steel by my own son, that erased 68 years of motherhood, sacrifice, and blind trust. "My name is Gloria. I am 68 years old, and the man who threw me out of my home that morning like I was garbage left too long by the curb was my only child. I need to say this clearly so you understand why this story matters. It's not a mystery. It's not a fable. It's a warning, a plain, hard truth about what betrayal looks like when it wears the face of someone you love. It was a Tuesday morning in November, the kind of crisp, bright day that usually makes old bones ache but also gives a sense that things are still holding steady. I was in the kitchen stirring oatmeal, humming a hymn I barely remembered the words to, when Eric walked in. He was sharply dressed, like always hair-trimmed, cologne strong, phone in one hand, papers in the other. "We need to talk," he said. I thought he might ask about Thanksgiving plans, maybe tell me he was dating someone. I wasn't expecting him to shove papers into my hand and say, "You signed this already, the house is mine, you need to leave today." I blinked. "What are you talking about?" He scoffed. "Don't act surprised, Mom. You signed over the deed a month ago. Remember that little stack of papers I brought with your coffee? Estate planning, you called it." I remembered. He'd spoken so kindly that day, told me not to worry, that he was protecting me from taxes and legal complications. I trusted him. I didn't read the papers. I didn't ask questions. I was his mother. "You tricked me," I whispered. He smirked, then laughed, not kindly, not nervously, but like someone who just got exactly what they wanted. "Well, yeah, of course I did. You think I was going to let this house rot with you sitting in it all alone, wasting space? This place is worth over $500,000 now. I've got plans, real plans." My knees felt weak. I reached for the back of a chair to steady myself. "Please, Eric, just give me time. Let me stay through the winter. I raised you here. This is my home." He rolled his eyes. "Spare me the drama. You're lucky I didn't do this sooner. You think you've been doing me a favor all these years? You were a burden, Mom. Always with your little sob stories, sewing dresses for pennies while Dad died working himself into the ground." His voice sharpened. "You think you matter? You're old. You're broke. And you've been squatting in my investment." Tears came hot and fast. I stepped closer, reaching for his arm. "I loved you. I gave you everything. I sold my shop, my life's work, so you could start that business." He yanked his arm away like my touch disgusted him. "Yeah, well, thanks for that. Worked out pretty damn well for me, didn't it?" My breath caught in my throat. I begged shamelessly, pitifully, because in that moment, I still thought there was a piece of the boy I raised left inside him. "Please, Eric, just let me stay a little longer. Please. I have nowhere to go." That's when he snapped. He leaned in close, his voice low and vicious. "Get out of my house, you pathetic old woman. You're nothing. You don't own anything here." Then, God help me, he took a crumpled $10 bill from his wallet and threw it at my face like I was filth. "Here, that's for the road. Should be enough for a cup of coffee in a cheap motel, if they even take your stinking ass." I stood there frozen, shaking, tears blurring my vision. "How could you?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stormed past me, yanked open the front door, and started throwing my things, my coat, my tote bag, my old sewing kit out onto the porch. When I reached down to gather them, he shoved past me again. His shoulder hit mine hard. I lost balance, slipped on the welcome mat, and fell to the floor. I tasted blood. My palm was scraped. My hip throbbed. I looked up, still half hoping he'd reach down, say it was a mistake, pull me up like he used to when he was small and scared of falling himself. He didn't. He stood over me, stone-faced, and said, "You've got 5 minutes." I pulled myself up, piece by piece, bone by bone, and walked out that door for the last time. The door slammed behind me, louder than thunder, sealing off the only home I had ever known. Outside, the cold hit me like punishment. I bent to collect my scattered belongings, some rolled into the bushes, others lying in the driveway like debris after a storm. My hands were trembling as I stuffed everything into the canvas tote. I couldn't feel my fingers, but it wasn't just the wind. It was the emptiness, the shock, the humiliation. I walked because I had no choice. Every step away from that house felt like walking away from my own shadow. Familiar streets blurred past, my knees ached, my chest burned. I didn't know where I was going, I just needed to keep moving before I collapsed on the sidewalk and turned to dust. By late afternoon, I found the warehouse. It was behind a shuttered car wash. A rusted side door hung half open. Inside was dark, musty, and abandoned broken shelves, scattered rags, and silence. But it was dry, and it was mine at least for the night. I sat on a plastic crate, wrapped my coat tighter, and wept not because I was homeless, but because I had let myself believe love meant safety. If you feel her pain too, tap like and comment where you're watching this from. You might not be as alone as you think. That night, I curled on a torn tarp under a broken window. The wind howled through cracks in the walls. And somewhere deep inside me, something else howled too, a grief too old to scream, too raw to name. I had nothing but a canvas bag, a $10 bill I refused to touch, and a prayer that someone, somewhere, still believed mothers mattered. I didn't know it then, but that warehouse would become the place where my story began again. A place where I would learn that the fire inside me hadn't died, it had only been smothered. And it was about to burn. The sun dipped low that first night, and the warehouse grew darker than I imagined darkness could feel. I'd always thought the absence of light was just that, an empty space between sunset and sunrise. But in that warehouse, it became something else, a presence, a silence that leaned in close and breathed against the back of my neck. Every creak, every distant dog's bark, every gust of wind that moaned through the cracks in the tin roof made me flinch. I found an old tarp in the corner and spread it on the floor. It smelled of mildew and motor oil, but it was better than lying bare on the concrete. I folded my coat into a makeshift pillow and wrapped myself in the spare sweater I'd packed. It did little to stop the chill. My body ached from the fall Eric had given me, but more than that, it ached from a kind of grief I didn't yet know how to name. I had given him everything. My years, my health, my savings. I gave up my sewing business when his startup needed capital, sold my machines, closed my shop. I told myself it was worth it, he was building a future. Now, he had one, and I had nothing. I cried, quietly, not from weakness but from sheer disbelief. I never thought I'd end up like this, not after a life of doing the right things. I'd worked, paid taxes, voted, gone to church. I stayed faithful to a man who died too young and raised a child who, somehow, had lost his soul along the way. When I finally drifted into a shallow sleep, it was filled with flickers of memory Eric as a boy, running through the house in socks that slid across the hardwood. Walter smiling with his arm around my waist as we danced in the kitchen. My old shop on Maple Street, the hum of machines, the smell of fabric and thread. I woke before dawn, shivering. My hip throbbed from where I'd hit the floor. I sat up slowly, bones creaking like the rusted shelves beside me. I needed food, water, a plan. $10 wasn't going to get me far, and pride wasn't going to buy me breakfast. There was a small strip mall 3 blocks over, if I remembered correctly. A gas station, a dry cleaner, a grocery store. I wrapped my coat tight and headed out just as the sky began to lighten. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Each step was a dull scream from the muscles and joints that had been too long ignored. I tried not to think about what I must have looked like, an old black woman in a coat 2 sizes too big, walking stiffly down cracked sidewalks before most folks were awake. At the gas station, I lingered near the coffee counter, trying not to be obvious as I eyed the warm sandwiches spinning behind the heat lamp. I reached into my tote, pulled out the $10 bill, and held it like it was something fragile. The cashier, a young man with earbuds in, didn't even glance at me when I paid. I bought a coffee, a banana, and a small sausage biscuit. Total, $6.78. It was the best meal I'd had in 2 days. I sat outside on the curb, away from the pumps, the biscuit warm in my hand. The coffee burned my tongue a little, but I didn't care. I closed my eyes, letting the steam rise into my face like prayer. It was pitiful and beautiful all at once. When I finished, I wrapped the remaining $2 and change in a tissue and tucked it deep into my tote. Emergency money. I wasn't sure what emergency looked like now, but I had a feeling it was coming. I wandered for a while after that. Not far. Just enough to feel less like a ghost. I peeked into shop windows, nodded politely at joggers, smiled at babies in strollers whose mothers steered them past me with wary glances. At a park bench, I sat for an hour watching squirrels dart up trees, their urgency reminding me of the way I used to move, always with purpose, always with a list in my head. It was around noon when I saw the boy. He was no more than 10, standing near the back entrance of a thrift store, struggling with a jacket that had torn down the side. He was frowning, tugging at the sleeve, clearly frustrated, his mother distracted, talking on the phone barely noticed. I don't know what made me walk over. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was habit, maybe it was the simple, aching need to be useful again. "Would you like some help, baby?" I asked gently. The boy looked at me, uncertain. His mother glanced over, phone still pressed to her cheek, and nodded half-heartedly. "If you can fix it, sure. It's old anyway." I reached into my tote, pulled out my sewing kit, and crouched beside him. My knees cracked like old floorboards, but my hands remembered what to do. The needle was thin, the thread smooth, the tear clean. I worked quickly, my fingers moving with practiced ease. In less than 10 minutes, the jacket was whole again. The boy smiled. "Thanks, lady." I smiled back. "You're welcome, sweetheart." That was when I heard the voice behind me. "Well, I'll be damned. You stitch like a pro." I turned. A man in his 60s, tall and wiry, stood with a brown apron smeared with oil. He had kind eyes and a curious tilt to his head, like someone always measuring a situation. "I used to be," I said, standing slowly. "Ran a sewing shop. A long time ago." He extended a hand. "Name's Henry Bell. Got a little repair shop 2 doors down. Mostly fix machines and electronics, but folks bring in busted zippers and torn uniforms all the time. Ever thought of picking the needle back up?" I blinked. "I don't have a place, or the tools, or much else." He grinned. "You got hands. That's a start." He gave me his card handwritten, a little greasy, but real. "Come by tomorrow. I'll find something for you to fix. I pay in cash and leftover lunch." I held the card like it was made of gold. That night, I returned to the warehouse with something I hadn't carried in days' hope. The tarp still stank. The floor was still hard, but my fingers tingled with memory, with possibility. I wasn't just surviving anymore. Something was waking up. I woke to the sound of something scuttling across the concrete. For a second, I thought it was a dream, a memory from some other life where rodents and cold floors didn't exist. But when I opened my eyes and saw a rat disappear into a hole near the far wall, I knew exactly where I was. The warehouse was colder that morning. The kind of cold that settled in your bones and refused to leave, like bitterness that had found a permanent home in your chest. My hip ached from sleeping on the tarp again, and my back felt like I'd spent the night tangled in wires. I rubbed my arms, trying to summon some warmth, but it was useless. This was my new reality. No hot showers. No soft bed. No morning news murmuring from a nearby television. Just silence, dust, and the bitter taste of being forgotten. Still, something inside me stirred faint, but real. I had Henry Bell's card tucked inside the pocket of my coat. That little square of greasy paper felt like a lifeline. I hadn't held anything so full of potential in a long time. I got up slowly, brushed myself off as best I could, and splashed bottled water on my face from a half-used bottle I'd salvaged from a public trash bin the night before. My reflection in the dusty window made me flinch. Puffy eyes, wrinkled skin, hair matted to one side, a woman undone but not yet broken. I made my way to the strip mall again, this time with more purpose. I still had $1.42 in my pocket. Not enough for much, but I found a small coffee shop with a hot water dispenser. I asked the cashier, a girl barely old enough to vote, if I could fill a cup I brought with me. She looked at me like I was asking for charity, which I suppose I was. "Fine," she muttered, before turning back to her phone. I thanked her anyway. I always do. I sat on the bench outside, sipping hot water like it was tea from a fine china set. The sun was still low in the sky, and the world moved slowly. Morning joggers passed, bundled in sweatshirts, earbuds in, eyes forward. No one saw me. And honestly, that suited me just fine. By 10 o'clock, I stood outside Henry Bell's repair shop. It was smaller than I imagined, just a narrow storefront with a cracked sign that read, "Bell's Fix It All." The windows were cluttered with old radios, broken blenders, and sewing machines that had long since seen their prime. A bell rang overhead as I pushed the door open. Henry looked up from behind the counter, a pair of magnifying glasses perched on his nose. Well, look who didn't vanish with the morning fog. "I said I'd come," I said, offering a thin smile. He grinned. "Most folks don't. Come on back." He led me through a tight hallway into a back room, which was somehow messier than the front. Tools, bolts, fabric scraps, and half-fixed appliances covered every surface. But in the corner, near a dusty window, stood an old Singer sewing machine. "She's got some years on her," Henry said, patting the machine. "But she still hums if you treat her right." I walked over, ran my fingers along the frame. The metal was cool, but the weight of it grounded me. This wasn't just a tool. This was a memory, a promise, a version of me I hadn't touched in decades. Henry placed a canvas bag on the table beside me. "Lady came in yesterday with a box of stuff for donation, jackets, pants, few tablecloths. Said if I could get 'em stitched, she'd give me $5 a piece to sell 'em in the shop. You up for that?" I sat down. "I can try." The moment I pressed the pedal, I felt it, the rhythm, the control, the sense of something coming together. The machine sputtered a bit at first, like it hadn't been touched in years, but it didn't take long for it to find its groove. Neither did I. I patched a sleeve, then a torn hem, then a blouse, missing buttons. My fingers remembered more than I expected. By noon, I had finished 5 pieces. My back ached, but it was the ache of purpose, not defeat. Henry whistled low when he returned. "Damn, lady, you weren't kidding. I told you. I used to do this for a living." "Well, you still got it." He handed me a $10 bill, clean, crisp, respectful. "Not much, I know, but it's honest." I stared at it. Then I nodded and folded it carefully into my coat. This was different. This wasn't charity or insult or a weapon thrown in my face. This was earned. He pointed to a small fridge near the corner. "There's leftover lasagna from my sister's dinner last night. Help yourself before it goes bad." I nearly cried at the smell: cheese, tomato, warmth. As I ate, Henry sat across from me, tinkering with a broken toaster. "You got people, Gloria." The question caught me off guard. I hadn't told him my name yet, but I nodded slowly. "Had a son," I said. "Still have him, technically. But not really." He didn't press, just nodded like he understood more than he let on. "Well," he said, standing and stretching, "if you want to keep coming back, there's always more clothes needing patching. And if you're comfortable, you could set up here on weekdays. I'll clear that table." For the first time in days, I felt my chest expand without pain. "Thank you," I said, and meant it. I walked back to the warehouse that evening with a full stomach, a clean $10 bill, and a head spinning with something dangerous and rare possibility. The walls still groaned, the tarp still smelled, and the wind still howled through the broken roof. But when I lay down that night, I smiled. I had made something today, fixed something, been seen. And for the first time since Eric had shoved me out like yesterday's garbage, I felt like maybe I wasn't done yet. 3 weeks. That's how long it had been since I first stepped into Henry Bell's cluttered little shop, hands trembling and heart hollow. 3 weeks of mending jackets and hemming pants in that back room by the window. 3 weeks of lasagna leftovers, of warm coffee in mismatched mugs, of someone remembering my name without sneering when they said it. And for 3 weeks, the world outside kept turning. The warehouse was still my shelter, and I kept that fact hidden from Henry. I wasn't ready to show him the corners of my life that still stank of shame. He didn't ask, and I didn't volunteer. But every morning, I left the warehouse with my coat zipped to the chin, face lifted toward the rising sun like I was walking out of a house that loved me. Henry had cleared a permanent space in the back room, nothing fancy, just a folding table, a desk lamp, and a seat cushion someone had donated from an old office chair. But to me, it was a throne. Every morning I sat, arranged my needles and thread, and let my hands work while my mind wandered through old memories. Henry started calling me Miss G, said it sounded classy, said it made me seem like one of those ladies who used to own fancy boutiques downtown before the malls took over. It made me laugh, and I hadn't laughed in weeks. I earned enough to buy myself proper food again. A hot meal here, a second-hand cardigan there. I even bought a small travel-sized toothbrush and a tin of balm for my chapped lips. You wouldn't think those things matter until you've gone without them. Dignity has a taste, a smell, a way it wraps around you when you start to reclaim the smallest comforts. One afternoon, just as I was finishing up a hem on a woman's winter coat, Henry came in holding a cracked cell phone and a paper bag. "You're getting a visitor," he said, placing the bag on my table. "A what?" "A customer came by asking for the lady who sews. Said she saw one of your coats at the flea market and wanted to meet the woman behind the stitches." My heart leapt, then fell. I wasn't ready for people. Not really. I still hadn't figured out who I was becoming, only who I no longer was. The woman arrived 10 minutes later, middle-aged, tall, with a blonde bob and a cardigan that screamed, "Suburban real estate agent." Her name was Dana. She held out her hand and smiled like we were at a book club, not a repair shop. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said. "This coat," she gestured to the thick navy wool hanging over her arm. "It used to be my mother's. I found it in a box I was going to donate, torn at the shoulder, but when I saw it again at the market, repaired so cleanly, I nearly cried." I nodded, unsure what to say. "You did beautiful work," she continued. "Henry told me your name was Gloria. You remind me of my mom. She used to sew too. She passed a year ago." Her voice caught. "I'm sorry," I said, finally finding my own. She looked down, then smiled. "Would you be willing to repair a few more? I have some of her old things, dresses, scarves. I can pay, of course." I wanted to say no. Not because I didn't need the money, I did, but because it felt like too much too soon. My world was still held together with pins and thread, and I wasn't sure it could handle new seams. But something in her face, gentle, familiar, gave me pause. "I'd be honored," I said softly. That night, I returned to the warehouse carrying the paper bag Dana had left for me, 2 cardigans, a skirt, and a silk scarf with tiny pearls sewn along the edge. I laid them on the tarp like they were sacred, and maybe, in a way, they were. Symbols of something old being brought back to life. I stitched by moonlight, humming a hymn I hadn't sung in years. My fingers worked slow, tender, respectful. That scarf. It reminded me of one I'd sewn for my wedding day. I remembered the feel of Walter's hands on my waist, the way he'd whispered, "You look like sunlight." By morning, the scarf was whole again, and so was something inside me. 2 days later, Dana returned, this time with a small box of fabric scraps and a folded note. "Thank you for helping me feel close to her again. Your hands do more than fix clothes, they hold memories together." I cried over that note. Henry, of course, teased me when he caught me sniffling. "I knew you were magic. You sew stories, not seams." He wasn't wrong. Over the next week, word began to spread. Slowly, quietly, like gossip in a church pew. First it was Dana's friends, then a woman who volunteered at the senior center, then a mother with a Girl Scout uniform that needed patching. They all came, and they all left with something more than repaired fabric. They left with a piece of me. Henry asked me one morning if I'd ever consider teaching. Said the community center nearby had a small craft room that sat empty most days. "They could use someone like you," he said. "Not just to teach stitches, but to show these kids, these young moms, that hands can build again, even after breaking." I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't want to, but because I wanted to so badly. It scared me. I had spent the last month trying not to be seen. And now, people were beginning to look. And worse, believe. That night, as I lay in the warehouse surrounded by finished coats and spools of thread, I whispered aloud to the dark, "I think I'm coming back." And the wind, softer this time, didn't howl. It listened. It was the first Sunday I didn't cry when I woke up. The warehouse, as usual, was cold. The wind still slid through cracks in the walls like a thief, and the concrete floor hadn't grown any softer overnight. But that morning, there was something different in the air. A stillness, not emptiness, but peace. I sat up on the tarp and wrapped the worn cardigan Dana had given me tighter around my shoulders. In my tote bag were the usual things. My sewing kit, a granola bar I'd saved from yesterday, and Henry's card creased now, the ink smudged, but still a reminder that someone had believed in me when I couldn't. I stretched, stood, and took a deep breath. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I hummed a hymn, not loudly, just under my breath. His eye is on the sparrow, soft and shaky. It used to be my favorite when I'd walk to church with Walter and little Eric in his Sunday suit. That song always reminded me that no matter how small or forgotten I felt, I was still seen. I didn't go to church that morning. I wasn't ready. But I passed by one. The First Trinity Baptist Church sat on the corner of a quiet block, its white steeple rising like hope itself. The choir had already started by the time I reached the sidewalk. I paused, pretending to check my bag just so I could listen. Their voices poured through the stained glass, rising like steam from a kettle, warm, healing, familiar. I stood there for nearly 10 minutes, head bowed slightly, eyes closed, letting it wash over me. No one noticed me. No one had to. I was exactly where I needed to be outside, but not shut out. Then I continued on, coat buttoned, head higher. Henry's shop was closed on Sundays, but he'd given me the key to the back entrance. "Just in case you want to sew or warm up," he'd said with a wink. I didn't take the offer lightly. Trust is a sacred thing when you've been robbed of it. Inside, I turned on the small space heater and made myself a cup of instant coffee from the tin he kept under the sink. I pulled out the mending from Dana, 3 skirts and a delicate blouse, and began to work. An hour in, the bell over the front door rang. I froze. Sundays were Henry's day off. No one was supposed to come in. I set my needle down and stepped cautiously into the front room. She stood there in heels too high for a Sunday morning and a trench coat that screamed money louder than it did style. Her hair was pulled tight, her lipstick sharp, and even before she turned fully, I knew. It was her. Rebecca, Eric's wife, my daughter-in-law, or rather, the woman who had stood in my kitchen years ago, calling me Mom while handing me wine and talking about baby names, and who, just last month, had helped my son throw me out like spoiled food. I swallowed hard. "Rebecca," I said evenly. She blinked, clearly surprised. "Oh, Gloria, I didn't realize you'd be here. This is where I work now," I replied, keeping my voice steady. She hesitated, then smiled tight, nervous. "I heard from someone at the market that a seamstress was working miracles out of Belle's shop. I thought it was a coincidence. Guess not." I didn't reply. Let her sit with the weight of that. She shifted, glancing around the shop. "You've done well for yourself," she said, like I was a cat that had landed on its feet after falling out of a 10th-story window. I stepped behind the counter, not because I needed to, but because I wanted something between us. "What do you want, Rebecca?" Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked suddenly smaller, less polished. "Eric doesn't know I'm here." That much was obvious. "I didn't agree with what he did," she said, her voice softer now. "But I didn't stop him either, and I should have." I said nothing. She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "I know this can't make things right, but maybe it can help." She placed it on the counter and slid it toward me. I didn't touch it. "I'm not a charity case," I said, my voice calm but sharp, "and I won't be bought off. Not again." She winced. "I didn't come to insult you," she whispered. He's not the man you think he is anymore. I mean, maybe he never was, but he's reckless now, with money, with people, with me." My stomach turned. I didn't want her confessions. I didn't want her regret. But a small, cruel part of me did want her to feel what it was like to be betrayed by the man she'd bet her life on. "I'm sorry, Gloria," she said again. This time, it sounded real. I nodded once. "I appreciate that." She turned to leave, then paused. "If you ever need anything at all, you can call me. I don't expect you to forgive us. But I had to say it." Then she walked out, the bell chiming behind her like the closing line of a song. I stared at the envelope for a long time. Eventually, I opened it not for the money, but because I needed to know. Inside was $200 in 20s and a note, "For food, for thread, for you, R." I placed the note in my pocket. I left the money on the counter. That evening, I returned to the warehouse, stitched in silence, and whispered to the dark, "Let him feel the weight of his choices." Not out of vengeance, but because truth, like thread, has a way of showing through even when you try to hide it under layers. The weather turned colder that week. Colder than I expected for early December, even for Michigan, the kind of cold that bit through 2 coats and still found a way to settle in your bones. I woke each morning stiff and slow, my breath fogging up the air inside the warehouse like a tired ghost. I'd tried to block the cracks in the roof with cardboard and old blankets, but it wasn't enough. Nothing ever really is when it comes to stopping the kind of cold that comes from both outside and within. The concrete floor felt like ice under my soles, and I slept fully dressed now, hat, gloves, scarf, everything. But no matter what I did, I couldn't stop the chill from creeping into my ribs. I told myself I'd be fine, but I wasn't 25 anymore. I wasn't even 50. One night, I woke up coughing, my chest rattling like an old furnace. My throat burned, and my breath felt tight. I sat up, panicked, trying to calm myself. Just a cold, I told myself. Just the cold. But something about it felt heavier. I wrapped myself tighter and rocked gently until my lungs settled. The next morning, Henry took one look at me and frowned. "You look like hell, Miss G," he said, placing a mug of tea in front of me. "And not the Sunday kind." "I'm fine," I lied, pulling the mug close. The heat felt like heaven on my fingers. "Don't give me that," he said, his voice low but firm. "You've been losing color every day since last week. You cough like a diesel truck, and your hands shake when you thread a needle. That ain't just a little cold." I didn't answer. Henry leaned on the counter. "Where are you sleeping, Gloria?" The way he said my name, it wasn't just curiosity. It was concern. The kind of concern you only get from someone who knows suffering personally. I hesitated. Then I exhaled. "An old warehouse, near the car wash off Lincoln." He stared at me for a beat, then shook his head slowly. "Damn." "I've been managing," I added quickly. "I keep it clean. It's quiet. No one bothers me. No one helps you either." I didn't argue. I couldn't. Henry rubbed his jaw, clearly thinking something over. Then he said, "I got an old RV out back. Ain't moved in years, but it's got insulation, a little heater. Bed's small, but it's off the ground. You could stay there, just until you get back on your feet." I shook my head. "I can't impose. You wouldn't be. That thing's been collecting dust for a decade. I was gonna sell it for scrap, but my sister keeps saying it's bad luck to gut something that used to take us to the Smokies every summer." He grinned. Now it might finally serve a better purpose. I looked at him. Really looked. His eyes were steady, kind, not pitying, just honest. "Let me think about it," I said. He nodded. "It'll be unlocked if you change your mind." That night, I returned to the warehouse like I always did. I tried to lie still. I tried to ignore the wind, but my body wouldn't settle. I kept thinking about that tiny RV sitting behind the shop, just waiting. At 2:15 a.m., I made my decision. I gathered my things, what little I had, and stepped into the night. The walk wasn't long, but the air was cruel. My fingers ached even through the gloves. I moved quickly, my tote bag slung over my shoulder, my sewing kit wrapped inside a scarf to keep it from freezing. When I reached the shop, the RV was exactly where Henry said it'd be, behind the garage, covered in leaves and dust but still standing. The door creaked as I opened it. Inside smelled like old wood and engine oil, but it was dry. There was a cot with an old quilt, a tiny heater plugged into the wall, and a curtain that separated the sleeping area from a kitchenette. I sat on the cot and exhaled for what felt like the first time in days. The heater hummed to life, filling the space with a low warmth that made me want to weep. I didn't, but I came close. The next morning, Henry found me in the back, sipping coffee from a chipped mug he'd left by the sink. He said nothing, just nodded like it was the most natural thing in the world. After that, life got quieter, easier in small ways. Dana continued to bring clothes now from friends and neighbors. She started calling me Miss G, too. Said it made me sound like a woman of mystery and style. I liked that. One afternoon, a young mother named Tasha brought in her son's scout uniform, asking if I could sew on some new badges. "I tried myself," she said, laughing. "It looked like spaghetti." We sat and talked while I worked about motherhood, about exhaustion, about how hard it was to hold it all together. I told her a few stories, sanitized ones, of course about raising Eric. She laughed and wiped her eyes and said, "You remind me of my auntie. She always made broken things beautiful." The words stayed with me. That night in the RV, I wrote them down in a notebook Henry had given me for ideas, dreams, or grocery lists. On the first page, I wrote, "Make broken things beautiful." It became my mantra. And for the first time since that awful morning Eric had shoved me out with a $10 insult and a heart full of greed, I felt like I was becoming someone new, not someone replaced, but someone rebuilt. I was adjusting to the rhythm of my new life. Early mornings, steam rising from the old kettle in the RV, sewing through the daylight hours, occasional laughter with Henry or a new customer. It was fragile, but it was mine. A life stitched together from scraps and silence, held by the thread of dignity I was slowly reclaiming. But the past doesn't like to stay buried. It comes back with its own agenda. It was a Wednesday morning when it returned, wrapped in perfume and pearls, standing just outside the shop like she owned the sidewalk. Eric's ex-girlfriend, Camille. I hadn't seen her in over a decade, not since the two of them had their messy breakup in his 20s. Back then, she was loud, dramatic, obsessed with appearances, the kind of woman who turned every room into a stage. Eric had been drawn to her chaos, mistaking it for passion. Now she looked different, still put together, still bold but older, sharper, like life had trimmed the softness from her edges. "Gloria?" she asked, squinting into the sunlight as she stepped inside the shop. I stood up slowly, still in my sewing apron. "Camille." She smiled, almost sheepishly. "I wasn't sure if it was really you. Dana told me about this place, said a Miss G was doing wonders with fabric and broken hearts." I raised an eyebrow. "You came here for mending?" She shook her head. "I came because I heard your name. I didn't move, didn't speak, just waited." She cleared her throat, suddenly unsure of herself. "I've been working with a local housing nonprofit, helping older women seniors, mostly who've been displaced by family or landlords. When I heard what Eric did, I was horrified. I said nothing." She continued, "I'm not trying to dig up the past, but I wanted to say I'm sorry for the part I played. Back then, when we were together, I think I encouraged him to put money before people, to look at status as love. I didn't realize it until years later. I didn't know what shocked me more, that she'd come at all, or that she sounded sincere." She reached into her bag and pulled out a pamphlet. "We're starting a new housing initiative. Tiny homes, community support, job access. It's early, but I thought maybe you'd want to be involved. You've got skills, and heart, and a way of pulling people back to themselves." I looked at the brochure. Bright colors, happy faces, empty promises. Still, something inside me stirred. "I'm not looking for charity," I said firmly. "Good," she said. "I'm not offering it." She left the brochure on the table and walked out. Henry, who had been watching from the back, whistled low. "Well, damn, the past really is on tour this week." I rolled my eyes. "You think it's a setup? I think you should trust your gut. But don't ignore the part of you that wants to build." That night in the RV, I stared at the brochure under the dim light of the old desk lamp. Tiny homes, a real mailing address, a shared kitchen, a space for workshops and community learning, a place to be seen, to belong. I wasn't sure if I was ready, but I was sure I wasn't going back. The next day, I reached out to Camille. We met for coffee, neutral territory, daylight hours. She brought folders, plans, even a mock schedule of sewing classes they hoped to launch in the spring. "You'd get paid," she added, "and a small home of your own, off-site but part of the program." "What's the catch?" I asked. She smiled. "Just show up, teach what you know, and be yourself." It sounded simple. Too simple. But then again, maybe life doesn't always have to be complicated. Back at the shop, Henry clapped when I told him. "About damn time," he said. "That RV ain't gonna miss you, but I sure will." "You'll still see me," I promised. "I'm not disappearing." He nodded. "You've got too much light left in you for that." That night, I returned to the RV and packed what little I owned. It fit in 2 tote bags and a shoebox. I folded each item with care, not out of necessity, but out of gratitude. Every stitch of clothing, every spool of thread, every note from Dana or Tasha, they were the bones of my resurrection. Before I left, I wrote a note and taped it to the wall inside the RV. This space held my sorrow, but also my rebirth. Let the next soul who sleeps here find both rest and a reason to rise. G. Then I turned out the light and stepped into the cold night one last time, towards something better. The front door to my new home clicked open with a sound that nearly brought me to tears. It was just a simple key, brass and smooth, attached to a lanyard with the name of the program, Rise Together Initiative. But when I slipped it into the lock and heard that tiny turn so casual, so final it felt like the loudest declaration I'd heard in years. I stepped inside and took it in. It wasn't large, maybe 300 square feet, total, but it had everything I needed. A twin bed with fresh linens, a kitchenette with a working stove and fridge, a bathroom with hot water, and a desk placed directly under the window, a small dresser, a reading lamp, a chair that didn't wobble. Home. It even smelled new, like fresh paint and lavender cleaner. I ran my fingers across the countertop, opened every drawer, touched every surface. Not because I doubted it was real, but because I needed to feel it was. For too long, my world had been borrowed space, Henry's back room, a storage warehouse, a creaky old RV, places I fit but didn't belong. Now, for the first time in months, maybe years, I had a space that answered only to me. I didn't cry, not at first. But when I opened the bathroom cabinet and saw a stack of towels folded neatly with a tag that read, "Welcome home, Miss G," from Camille, the tears came hot and fast. It wasn't the towels. It wasn't even the gesture. It was the fact that someone had expected me to be here, had prepared this space not just as a room, but as a sanctuary. For me, the next few days passed in a blur of movement and hope. Camille introduced me to the other women in the program, older ladies like me, most of them displaced by family or bad landlords or retirement that didn't stretch far enough. There was Brenda, who used to work in a school cafeteria and knew how to make cornbread that would bring tears to your eyes. There was Joy, who used to run a church choir before arthritis slowed her down, and Maureen, quiet but kind, who brought me tea the first night without saying a word. They didn't ask me what had happened to me. And I didn't ask them either. Some things don't need to be spoken aloud when the pain wears a familiar shape. Instead, we found our rhythm, shared kitchen shifts, communal dinners on Fridays, folding laundry together while trading stories about the men we loved and the ones we outlived. Laughter found its way into our conversations like it had been waiting just outside the door. Camille kept her promise too. She set me up to lead a weekly sewing class in the community center's workshop. Just a dozen people at first, women from the neighborhood, a few teenagers trying to learn a skill, and even a young man named Javier who wanted to start a tailoring business someday. The first time I stood in front of them, chalk in hand, I felt the old nerves rise, but then I caught sight of my reflection in the window. Strong shoulders, gentle eyes, calloused hands. I remembered who I was. "All right," I said, clearing my throat. "Let's talk about the invisible thread." They looked at me, confused. "In sewing," I continued, "sometimes you use invisible thread, clear, strong, holds the fabric together without being seen. Life's like that too. The strongest parts of us, they don't always show." Javier raised his hand. "Is that what makes a good seamstress?" I smiled. "That's what makes a survivor." They leaned in, scribbled notes, asked questions, and as I demonstrated how to patch a tear in denim without making it stiff, I realized something strange but beautiful. I wasn't just mending fabric anymore. I was mending people. And they were mending me. Word of the class spread. Dana showed up one week with her niece. Tasha brought her son again, this time with a new badge to sew. Even Henry came by, though he claimed he was just checking for electrical issues. He stayed for the entire lesson. Later that evening, he handed me a small box wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" I asked. "Just something I found while clearing the garage," he said, avoiding eye contact. Inside was a thimble. Not just any thimble, my thimble, the one I'd left behind when Eric threw me out. I stared at it, stunned. "You kept it?" I asked. He shrugged. "Found it in one of the bags of donations. Guess someone thought it wasn't worth much." "It's worth everything." I placed it on the windowsill of my new home, right next to the sewing kit I now used every day. That night, I wrote in my notebook, "This is not the life I had planned, but it's the one I've chosen to build, stitch by stitch, breath by breath." And for the first time since that terrible day, I slept in warmth that didn't feel borrowed. The invitation came printed on thick cream cardstock, tucked inside an envelope with my name written in elegant cursive, Gloria Bell Harper. I hadn't seen my full name written like that in years, not since the days when bills came with Walter's name beside mine, or when church announcements still listed me as part of the Women's Ministry Board. This invitation, however, didn't come from the church. It came from Rebecca. Yes, that Rebecca. Inside, it read, "You are cordially invited to the Harper family holiday dinner, Saturday, 6 p.m., formal attire, hosted by Eric and Rebecca Harper." There was no return address, no personal message, no explanation. Just formality, dressed up like reconciliation. I stared at it for a long while, my fingers tightening around the paper. After everything, the shouting, the betrayal, the $10 thrown in my face, now they wanted me to come back, to sit at the table like nothing had happened, to pose for photos and play the part of the grateful matriarch. Camille saw it on my counter the next morning. She was dropping off flyers for our next sewing class and spotted it beside my coffee mug. She didn't touch it, just raised an eyebrow. "That look says someone's trying to pull you back into a fire they lit themselves." I gave a dry laugh. More like trying to convince me the fire never happened. She didn't pressure me. No one did. But the invitation haunted me all week. I carried it to class by accident once, tucked between my lesson notes. I found myself staring at it during meals, wondering, not if I should go, but why they wanted me to. Guilt? Showmanship? Regret? Or maybe control? Henry, as always, kept it blunt. Go if you want, but don't go small, don't go quiet, and don't go alone. The idea lingered. Saturday came faster than expected. I stood in front of my closet, a modest collection of secondhand blouses, church dresses, and work aprons, and felt the stirrings of panic. I hadn't dressed up in years. The last time I wore heels, my knees complained for a week. But then I saw it. The royal blue dress. A wrap dress, tailored just right, with a soft shimmer in the fabric like moonlight. Dana had gifted it to me 2 weeks ago. "It looked like you," she said. "Strong, graceful, not afraid to be seen." That night, I wore it. I pinned my silver hair into a bun, added a touch of lipstick Camille had insisted I try, and slipped on the black flats Brenda had given me when her daughter sent the wrong size. A dozen women, a dozen gestures, all wrapped around me like armor. I took the city bus, walked 2 blocks in the cold, stood outside Eric's home, the house that used to be mine, and steadied my breath. The lights were blazing. Laughter poured from the windows like music from a ballroom. I could hear clinking glasses, the hum of holiday jazz, and the warmth of a world I no longer belonged to. Still, I rang the bell. Rebecca answered. She blinked, stunned, as though she hadn't expected me to come. "Gloria, you look beautiful." I nodded once. "I came to return something." She stepped aside, ushering me in. The warmth hit me immediately, faux cheer mixed with the sharp scent of expensive candles. The house looked the same, but different. Colder, sleek, without soul. And then I saw him. Eric. He stood at the edge of the living room, drink in hand, surrounded by colleagues and friends, laughing like a man untouched by shame. Until he saw me, his face paled. His grip on the glass tightened. "Mother," he said flatly. "Eric." The room quieted, tension crackling through the air like static. I stepped forward, not to embrace him, not even to accuse, but to hand him a gift. A small box, wrapped in brown paper and tied with a navy ribbon. He stared at it. "What's this?" "Something you left behind," I said. "Or maybe something you never truly held." He took it reluctantly, tore the ribbon, opened the lid. Inside, nestled in soft fabric, was the thimble. My thimble. The one he'd thrown out with my belongings. He looked up, confused. "I kept it," I said, voice steady, "because it reminded me of who I am, not what you said I was, not what you tried to make me believe, but who I've always been." Whispers buzzed around the room. Rebecca looked like she might cry. Eric looked like he might explode. "You came here to make a scene?" "No," I said. "I came to show you I'm not afraid anymore." I turned, calm and slow, and walked out, back into the night, back into the real world. And when the door closed behind me, I felt lighter, as if, in that single act not of revenge but of reminder, I had stitched the final seam of my own healing. I didn't cry, not in the moment, not on the walk home, Not even when I peeled off the dress and hung it carefully back on the hook behind my bedroom door. What I felt instead was a strange, quiet triumph, like I had finally walked through the fire and come out the other side, not unburned, but still standing. And that was enough. By the time Sunday morning rolled around, the sky had changed. Snow fell gently, soft flakes clinging to the windows of my little home, the kind of snowfall that made the world seem briefly forgiven. I wrapped myself in a knitted shawl Joy had gifted me, cream-colored with little silver threads, and made a pot of tea. Then I sat down to write. For years, I'd been carrying my story in silence. Bits of it came out in sewing classes, in late-night talks with Henry, in quiet moments with Camille. But I'd never told the whole truth. Not to myself, not to anyone. So I began. My name is Gloria Bell Harper. I am 68 years old, and I was thrown out of my own home by the son I raised, with nothing but $10 and a bruised heart. The words poured like warm water from a cracked pipe. Not elegant, not polished, but real. I wrote for hours, my teacup forgotten, my hands trembling. I wrote until the sun shifted and my neck ached from leaning too far over the desk. And then I stopped, closed the notebook, placed my pen gently on top. I wasn't sure what I would do with it yet. Maybe nothing, maybe everything. Maybe someday I'd read it aloud to a room of women like me, forgotten, dismissed, underestimated, so they'd know they weren't alone. But for now, it was enough that it existed, that I existed. A few days later, Camille stopped by with news. I got a call from the city council, she said, nearly breathless. They're launching a community spotlight series highlighting women who've rebuilt their lives through adversity. They want you to speak. I blinked. Speak? In public? They heard about your classes, the sewing work, the story floating through the neighborhood like legend. She smiled. You've become something of a local hero. I laughed softly. Well, I don't feel like a hero. Just a woman with a needle and a will to keep going. Exactly, Camille said. That's what makes it powerful. I didn't say yes right away. The idea of standing on a stage with eyes watching and hearts listening made my skin prickle. But deep down, I knew this was a door, one I could choose to walk through or not. I gave myself 2 days. In that time, I asked the women in my sewing class what they thought. Tasha smiled and said, "You taught me how to mend more than pants." Joy squeezed my hand. Your voice could be someone else's lifeline. Even Henry, gruff as always, left a note tucked in my sewing basket. The world doesn't need perfect speakers. It needs real ones. Be real, G. So I said yes. The night of the event, I stood backstage in a small community theater, palms damp, heart racing. My dress was plain, my shoes flat, but around my neck, I wore the pearl-trimmed scarf I had repaired weeks ago, the one that reminded me of my wedding day, of beginnings, of belief. They called my name. I stepped into the light. For a moment, the brightness blinded me. I couldn't see the audience. I couldn't hear the applause. All I felt was the beat of my heart. And then I spoke. My name is Gloria, I began, my voice clear, strong. And once, I lost everything I thought made me who I was. My home, my son, my pride. But I learned that when you're forced to start over, you discover parts of yourself that were never allowed to shine before. A silence fell over the crowd. That good kind, the kind that means people are listening with their whole hearts. I'm not a hero, I continued. I'm just a woman who found herself in the ruins and built something better from the pieces. I ended with the words I had written in my notebook. Make broken things beautiful. When I finished, there were tears, applause, and a standing ovation I never expected. But the most powerful moment came later. An elderly woman approached me, gripping a photo in her hand. Her daughter stood beside her, gently translating. She wants you to know, the daughter said, that her house was taken by her own nephew, that she lived in her car for 3 months, that your story gave her hope again. The woman pressed the photo into my hand, a snapshot of her garden, now overgrown, but once full of roses. She wants to grow them again, her daughter said. I held that photo like a sacred thing, because it was. That night, I returned home not just seen but known. The wind outside howled again, but this time, it didn't scare me. It sounded like applause. After the speech, something shifted in me. Not just inside, though, there was certainly that. A stillness, a strength that no longer wavered at the thought of Eric's name or the sight of that old neighborhood. But something shifted around me, too. People started sending letters, notes, handwritten, typed, folded into delicate envelopes with trembling return addresses from places I'd never been: Baton Rouge, Spokane, even a little town in Maine. Most of them started the same way. Dear Miss G. They told me about betrayals, sons, daughters, cousins who sold land that wasn't theirs, who took advantage of aging parents, who disappeared the moment the checkbook ran dry. They shared stories of car trunks used as closets, fast food bathrooms as places to cry in privacy. One woman, 81, wrote about living behind a bowling alley for 3 years, her only friend, a retired bartender named Joe. They weren't looking for advice. They just needed to be heard. And somehow, I had become the ear. I read every letter. Every single one. Sometimes twice. Then one Sunday, I started writing back. Just one at first. Dear Alice, I wrote. You are not invisible. You are not crazy. You are not a burden. You are a woman who gave her life to a family that forgot how to honor it, and that is not your shame to carry. I signed it, with fierce love, Miss G. Then I wrote another, and another. By Tuesday, I had a stack of 10 envelopes ready to go, and a small ache in my wrist. Camille caught me at the post office, a little amused. You're building your own ministry, she said. I smiled. Not ministry, just patchwork. Henry, of course, found a way to make it practical. He set up a tiny corner in the back of the community center, a mailbox labeled Letters for Miss G. People could drop them in. No postage, no names required. By the end of the month, it was full. The letters became my Sunday ritual. I'd brew tea, light the lavender candle Maureen gave me, pull out my notebook, and read them in silence. I laughed. I cried. I prayed sometimes, not because I was especially holy, but because some pain only has echoes if you offer them upward. Then I wrote, one reply. 3, 7, some short, some pages long, but always from the heart. One day, a letter arrived that stopped me cold. No return address, no name, just a single page, written in shaky cursive. You probably won't believe this is me. I barely believe it myself. But I saw the speech, and I recognized the fire in your voice. You raised me better than I became. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know, I hear you now, and I'm sorry. It wasn't signed, but I knew. Eric. I sat with the letter for a long while. My fingers traced the folds, the ink. He hadn't asked for anything. No money, no absolution, just to be heard. I didn't know what to feel. Part of me wanted to crumple it, toss it into the fireplace and never speak of it again. Another part remembered the boy who once held my hand so tight on the first day of school, scared I'd vanish if he let go. I didn't write him back. Not yet. But I kept the letter, tucked it in the notebook, right next to the first chapter of my memoir, right under the words, "This is the life I chose to rebuild." Some things take time. Others take more than that. A week later, Camille called. They want to publish your letters. I blinked. Who's they? Harper and Denton. Small press out of Chicago. They saw your speech online, yes. It's gone a little viral and they reached out. They want to turn the letters into a book. Maybe even do a podcast. A series called The Sunday Letters. I didn't speak for a full 30 seconds. I'm not a writer, I finally said. You're a truth teller, she replied. And somehow, that mattered more. That night, I stood by the window of my little home, tea in hand, snow falling again outside, the world hushed and listening. I whispered to the quiet, let someone hear this. Let someone feel less alone. And I knew. Somehow, someone would. They sent a car. A sleek black town car with leather seats and a driver named Marcus who offered me hot tea in a travel mug before I even buckled my seatbelt. Miss G, he said, it's an honor. I was wearing the same navy wrap dress from the night I confronted Eric, paired this time with a wool coat. Camille insisted I borrow from her winter conference collection. She also sent a small pair of pearl earrings. Not too loud, just enough to say, I know who I am. The interview was set to take place at a small studio in downtown Detroit. Nothing flashy, just cameras, sound guys, and a host named Rachel Dunn, who ran a Sunday morning program called Voices That Rise. It wasn't national, not yet, but it was the kind of show that mattered to our people, the women who brewed coffee before sunrise, the men who sat quietly with newspapers and pain in their knees, the grandmothers who tuned in while folding clothes for children who never called. I was terrified. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew too well. I had carried this story like a second skin, tucked in my bones, woven into the hem of every blouse I mended. Now, I was being asked to unfold it in front of cameras, in front of strangers, in front of a world that might not care. But when Rachel shook my hand, warm, steady, and said, "We've been waiting for your voice," I felt something settle in me. This was no longer just my story. It was ours. They wired me with a mic, gave me water, counted down from 5. And then, we began. Rachel's first question was gentle. "Miss G, the internet knows you as the woman who turned heartbreak into healing. But take us back. Where did it start for you?" I inhaled slowly, my hands folded in my lap. "It started," I said, with the door shutting behind me. I told the truth. About Eric. About the $10. About the warehouse that smelled like oil and silence. I told her about Henry and Dana and the thimble that came back to me like a message from God. I told her about the sewing classes, the tea, the RV, the notebook, and the moment my son, my own blood, told me I was a burden. Rachel didn't interrupt, didn't rush, just listened. "Sometimes," she nodded. "Sometimes," she blinked tears away. Finally, she leaned in and asked, "Why do you think your story is resonating with so many people right now?" I paused. Then I said, "Because too many of us were taught to suffer quietly, to clean up the messes without making noise, to accept that love means giving even when it costs us everything, and we're tired. We want to believe that dignity doesn't have to be earned, it's ours by right." Rachel exhaled. Amen. After the interview, the crew clapped not politely, but genuinely, like something holy had passed through the room. Rachel hugged me and whispered, "You just gave someone out there a reason to stay alive another day." I believed her. The segment aired the next morning, and something happened I hadn't expected. People showed up. Dozens came to the sewing class that week, some bringing fabric, some bringing stories, all bringing hearts cracked wide open. A man in his 70s waited after class to shake my hand. "You said what my wife was never allowed to say," he told me. "She's gone now, but I heard her voice in yours." Camille and the team at Rise Together couldn't keep up with the letters. They created a separate mailbox, then a digital page where people could send messages and support each other. The Sunday letters became more than a series. It became a movement, and through it all, I stayed grounded. Every day, I walked to the community center, repaired hems, listened, wrote letters, took deep breaths when memories of Eric's voice crept in. I still hadn't written him back, still didn't know if I ever would, but I thought of him sometimes, especially when people asked how I found the strength to forgive. I always answered the same way. I'm not there yet, but I'm walking, one stitch, one word, one breath at a time. It had been a long day, the kind that starts before sunrise and stretches far past supper, when your feet ache and your voice is just a whisper wrapped in warmth. I'd finished teaching 2 back-to-back classes, stitched the waistband on a pair of church pants for Joy's grandson, and helped Maureen fix the broken zipper on her winter coat. The center had buzzed with energy, the kind only shared purpose can create. Outside, the sky had turned a deep steel gray, the kind that promised rain without apology. I'd just locked the classroom door when I felt the first drop land on my cheek. By the time I rounded the corner toward my little house, it was pouring. I pulled my shawl tighter, head down, moving quickly. The streets were nearly empty, the air thick with the scent of wet pavement and cedar. I was steps from my porch when I saw it. A figure, standing by my door. Umbrella in one hand, suitcase at his feet, soaked through. Eric. It took my mind a full 5 seconds to believe what my eyes already knew. He looked thinner, paler. His eyes held the kind of tired you can't sleep off. His hair was unkempt, jacket clinging to him like it hadn't seen a dry closet in weeks. I stopped in the rain. He didn't move. Neither did I. We stood there, 2 silhouettes under God's sky, while the years between us howled. Then, he spoke. I didn't know where else to go. My heart, so carefully stitched back together, pulled tight at the seams. "I don't have anything left," he continued. "Rebecca left. The business failed. The house is gone. And I've been sleeping in my car for 3 weeks." He looked down, ashamed. "I heard your voice on the radio. The story. I didn't know how to face you, but I couldn't stay away." I didn't answer. I couldn't. Too many memories were rising all at once, the crack of his voice when he was 5, the teenage sarcasm, the rage in his eyes when he shoved me out the door, $10 fluttering at my feet like an insult. "I was wrong," he said, eyes glistening. "I was proud and scared and greedy. I thought money made me safe, and I blamed you when I lost it all, but it wasn't your fault." He reached into his jacket, pulled out a crumpled envelope. "I've been carrying this. Didn't know if I should send it, but here." I didn't take it. He set it gently on the porch step. "I'm not asking for anything," he added quickly. "Not a bed, not forgiveness. I just wanted you to know. I remember the sound of your laughter, the way your hands fixed everything. I remember the warmth in this house, and I've missed it. I've missed you." His voice cracked. "I'm sorry, Mama." It wasn't the word that broke me, it was the way he said it. Like he hadn't called me that in decades. Like he was trying it on again, afraid it might not fit. I walked past him, slowly. My key trembled in the lock. The door opened with a familiar creak. I didn't invite him in, but I didn't close the door either. I left it ajar, just a crack, as I walked inside. He didn't follow, but he didn't leave. I stood in my hallway, back pressed to the wall, and let the silence fill the space between us. Some part of me wanted to run to him, to wrap him in a blanket, feed him soup, kiss his temple like I did when he had fevers as a child. Another part remembered the cold sidewalk, the bruise on my hip, the way he smirked when he said he'd taken the house fair and square. Both truths lived inside me now. I turned back, gently opened the door wider. Eric still stood there, shoulders hunched, rain dripping from his collar. "You'll sleep in the RV," I said softly. His head shot up, eyes wide. "Don't mistake this for forgiveness," I added. "This is mercy." He nodded quickly, like a child being handed back a toy he thought lost forever. "I'll get some towels," I said, turning away. That night, as the rain slowed to a whisper, I sat in my chair and stared at the thimble on my windowsill. He was back, but I wasn't the woman he threw out. And this home, this heart, I rebuilt them brick by brick, stitch by stitch. He could stay, but he'd have to learn how to rebuild, too. The next morning, I found Eric standing by the porch, holding a chipped mug I'd left in the RV years ago. He'd washed it, I could tell. He held it carefully, like a fragile truce. "Coffee," he said softly. "Hope you don't mind." I didn't respond right away. I stepped onto the porch, sat on the top step, and wrapped my hands around my own cup, freshly brewed, warm cinnamon in the creamer. It wasn't a morning for confrontation. It was a morning for silence. Eric sat 2 steps down. Not beside me, not below me, just separate. The sky was overcast, the wind teasing at the edge of winter. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. A bus rumbled by. Normal sounds, safe sounds. We sat like that for several minutes. No accusations, no apologies. Just the space between a mother and her grown son, now stripped of power, stripped of certainty. Just 2 people trying to find footing on broken ground. "I read your letters," he said finally. I looked over. "I found the Sunday letters online," he continued. "The one to Alice, the one about being invisible." His voice broke. "You were writing to me, weren't you?" I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have one, but because the truth was complicated. "I didn't mean for it to go so far," he said. I thought it was just money. Just business. You'd bounce back. You always did." I turned to him slowly. "Eric, I bounced because I had to. Not because it didn't hurt." His face crumpled. He looked older than I remembered. Deflated. "I didn't know you were living in a warehouse," he whispered. "If I'd known—" "You would have what?" I interrupted, voice firmer now. "Come pick me up? Say sorry on the porch? You didn't want to know. That's worse than not knowing." He hung his head. I stood and walked down the steps, stood in front of him. "Eric, I need you to hear me clearly. I loved you with my whole soul. I sacrificed parts of myself you'll never understand to keep you fed, clothed, and educated. And when you turned me out, you didn't just take a house from me. You tried to erase my worth. Tears welled in his eyes. But, I continued, softer now, you didn't succeed. He nodded slowly. I know. I see that now. We stood in silence again. Then, hesitantly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. I found this in the back of the storage unit. I didn't open it. I thought, maybe it was yours. I took the box with cautious fingers, opened it. Inside was a brooch silver, with a delicate blue stone in the center. My mother's. I'd thought it lost years ago. I swallowed the lump in my throat. She gave this to me when I turned 30, said it reminded her of my strength. I think she'd be proud, Eric said. I closed the box gently, held it to my chest. He looked up at me, uncertain. What now? I met his gaze. Now? You start over. You find a job. You attend the community programs like everyone else. You live in that RV until you can afford something else. He nodded. And you stop asking for forgiveness. Let your actions speak. Let time rebuild what words cannot. Eric didn't argue. He simply said, okay. That afternoon, I brought him a bag of groceries, bread, soup, clean socks, the same way I'd done when he was 12 and had the flu. The same way I'd done when he moved into his first apartment and forgot to buy food. He accepted them with quiet gratitude. We didn't hug. We didn't pretend things were okay. But that night, as I watched the RV lights turn off one by one, I felt something new. Not closure, but motion, a slow turning of the page. And I knew some wounds don't heal with apologies. They heal with presence. Morning came in gray whispers that December didn't yet have the courtesy to hide. I opened my curtains and watched snow fall in gentle sheets against the world, the kind of snow that softens edges and quiets sound. It was cold out, bone-deep cold, but inside me, something felt warmer than it had in years. It wasn't joy. Not quite. It was resolution. I warmed tea in my little kitchen, the steam lifting into the cool air like breath from an old soul. I sipped slowly, savoring warmth in a way I hadn't allowed myself to in a long while. The invitation from the city council to speak had come through again, another event, another platform, but this time, I wasn't daunted. I felt grounded. I had a rhythm now, a purpose that outlasted hurt. A knock sounded at the door. When I opened it, there stood Eric, holding a travel mug covered in condensation and 2 paper bags wrapped in foil. I made breakfast, he said quietly. I stared, not because of what he did, but because of how far we'd come from that porch in the rain. Inside, the first bag was scrambled eggs and toast. Inside the second, oatmeal and fruit, enough for both of us. I wasn't sure what you liked, he admitted, lowering his eyes. You made an effort, I said, and that was enough. I closed the door behind him and motioned toward the small dining table. We ate in silence at first, no tension, no accusation, just the simple sound of spoons clinking and breath warming the cold kitchen. How's the job search? I asked, after a moment. He shrugged. I filled out a few applications, tried the community center. They said they'll call if something opens up. Good, I said carefully. Persistence matters more than perfection. He nodded. I wasn't ready for a hug. I wasn't ready for a grand reconciliation, but I was ready for existence in the same space without burning down what remained of us. When breakfast was done, he left to continue the search while I stayed behind to draft a letter, one of many that had become part of my Sunday ritual. I'd started writing not just in response to others' pain, but to articulate my own. Halfway through a paragraph about renewal and fractured families, my phone buzzed. It was Camille. Council wants you for a live interview tonight at 7. They want the theme to be Families Rebuilt. I exhaled slowly. I'd learned something about invitations like that. They weren't tests, they were milestones, and I had passed enough tests already. By mid-afternoon, I bundled up wool coat, knitted shawl, gloves, and walked to the community center where the televised interview would be held. Snow had settled into a slow rhythm, mid-December calm, rather than storm. Henry was there, holding a thermos. Thought you might want coffee before going on camera, he said with that characteristic half grin. I accepted the cup with a grateful nod. Thank you. Break a leg, he teased. I'd rather not, I shot back lightly. But the warmth of that cup, coffee, and kindness reminded me that I could be brave in more ways than one. Inside the makeshift studio, a small audience sat bundled in scarves and coats. Chairs were scattered, but full. Some faces were familiar: Dana, Tasha, Joy. Others were strangers. A few held notebooks. One elderly man tapped his cane, eyes bright. A producer gave me a cue: 3 minutes to live. I breathed deeply, not because I was nervous, but because I had been shaped by so many breaths just like this. The host, a woman named Laura, introduced me as someone whose story had become a beacon in the community. When I stepped up to the microphone, the warmth of the lights didn't blind me. They welcomed me. "Thank you," I began. "Not just for having me here, but for being here, for all of you who showed up, for those watching from places near and far." I saw faces light up, and I felt no fear. "I was once a woman without a home," I continued, voice steady. "I was told my life was over when I was thrown out of the house I had lived in for 30 years. I was given $10 and told to leave, and for a long time I believed that what happened to me was final." I paused, but it wasn't. My gaze swept the room. It was transformative, and it taught me that dignity is not something granted by others. It is claimed by each of us who decides to live forward instead of backward. A gentle applause followed, quiet, sincere. "We talk about families rebuilt, but what does that mean?" I lifted my hands, palms open. "Is it forgiveness? Maybe. Is it proximity? Not always. Is it shared meals? Shared rooms? Sometimes. But mostly, it's recognition. The recognition that people are more than the worst moments of their lives." I looked toward the camera. "To anyone listening tonight who feels discarded, forgotten, or unwanted, your life is not over. Your story is still being written, and more pages can be filled with purpose than you ever imagined." The applause this time was louder, shouts even, like hearts leaping into the message rather than just clapping for it. Later, as people gathered in small clusters around the studio, many came forward simply to say, "Thank you." A young man with tears in his eyes told me he lost his mother recently and hadn't known how to move forward. A woman in her 50s said she heard my Sunday letters on the radio and felt understood for the first time in years. And then, in the corner, I spotted Eric with a notebook in hand, eyes steady but respectful. He didn't interrupt my conversations. He just listened. When the last person had thanked me, he approached. "I watched," he said simply, "and I understood more this time." "Good," I replied. "Understanding is the first step." He nodded and turned away, not defeated, but not fully healed either. That night, I returned home with a warm heart and a fresh sense of purpose. I brewed tea in my kitchen again, looking out at the snowfall that had become a December whisper of hope. I wrote once more in my notebook. The storm changed direction today. Not because it ended, but because we stood in it and chose to rise. And that, more than anything, felt like the true definition of home. The snow came slowly at first, like a whisper falling from the gray sky, soft flakes drifting down to settle on rooftops and park benches. But by the time dusk fell that afternoon, it had become a steady curtain, turning the streets into a quiet white promise that the world might be a little kinder today than it was yesterday. I watched it from the window of my little home, cup of tea warming my palms, and felt the hush of winter settle into me like an old prayer. The snow didn't erase the past, it merely softened its edges, letting each memory breathe without cutting the way it once did. I was still thinking about the interview from the night before. I replayed parts of it in my mind, the way people's eyes lit up when I spoke about resilience, the sound of real applause rather than polite claps, the way my own voice didn't shake but carried truth. That was the part of the morning I clung to, like someone reaching for light in a dark room. My phone buzzed a message from Camille. "Lunch at 1? I've got something to show you. See." I smiled and slipped into my warmest coat before heading out into the snow. Camille met me at the cafe around the corner, warm lights and steam rising from mugs of hot chocolate as we shook snowflakes off our sleeves. "What's going on?" I asked, settling into the booth. She slid her tablet across the table. "I've been keeping an eye on the letters project," she said, and something came up. On the screen was a headline from a local paper. "Sunday Letters Warm Winter Hearts. A story of resilience and community." Under the headline were photos, some from the interview, some from class, and one that made my breath catch. A snapshot of me and a group of women, bundled in scarves, laughing over a pile of fabric scraps. "We might get a publishing deal," she said carefully, watching my face. A real one, with distribution and royalties. My heart thumped in old small rhythm, but real. You think it's ready? I asked. She nodded. Yes, but they want a draft of the full manuscript by February. February. That meant writing in the heavy quiet of winter, pouring story after story into pages that might reach someone who needed them. I took a deep breath. Okay, I said. Let's do it. We talked plans, deadlines, and visions over steaming mugs of cocoa, the snow tapping on the cafe windows like applause in the background. After lunch, I walked home through streets lined with white footsteps, soft, edges blurred. Snow made everything feel possible again. That afternoon, I found an old shoebox and began gathering letters, the ones people had sent, and the replies I had written back. I sorted them carefully, making piles labeled hope, grief, forgiveness. My own unpublished pages went into heart. There were so many stories that intertwined with mine. Stories of daughters who cared for aging parents, stories of husbands lost to time, stories of children who found their way back home after years of silence. And then I came upon his letter. Eric's, the one he had left without a signature. My fingers hovered over it for a moment, my breath caught a bit, then I placed it gently in the heart stack. Not hidden, but honored. Because even unanswered questions deserve respect. That evening, the snow outside turned crystalline under the street lamps, and I sat by the window listening to how quiet the night had become. I thought about the shortest days of winter, how they pull at your courage and ask you to hold on to light even when the sun barely shows up. I thought about my journey, the warehouse, the RV, the tiny apartment, the letters, the sewing classes, the interviews, the reconciliation not fixing, but working through. I picked up my notebook and wrote, "Winter collects our stories like snow collects on rooftops, each flake a moment, a choice, a breath. We don't escape the cold. We find warmth within it." Just then, another message came through. "Are you free tomorrow afternoon? I'd like to help with the first chapter. H." It was Henry. I smiled. Because even though winter was still here, even though the storm had more days to come, I wasn't walking through it alone anymore. The next morning, the sun rose weak but steady, and the snow glistened like tiny stars on every surface it touched. I made tea and sat at my desk, a fresh page open in my notebook. I looked at the lines I had already written and took a deep breath. Then I began to write slowly, deliberately, letting each word fall like snowflakes that found their place instead of melting away. The first chapter of the manuscript was no longer about what had happened to me. It was about what happened through me. I wrote, "This isn't just my story. It's every heart that ever felt abandoned and chose to keep beating anyway." I wrote until the sun dipped low and the room grew amber with the last light of day. By the time I set my pen down, the stack of letters beside me looked less like scraps of paper and more like a map, an atlas of human hearts. And somewhere out there, someone was waiting to hear a story that told them they mattered. I woke to a quiet that felt more like possibility than absence, like the world was holding its breath just long enough for me to find my own again. The snow had stopped overnight, leaving sidewalks shining like polished tablets in the morning light. I opened my curtains and watched the sun rise slowly, golden against white, and thought how strange it was that the coldest part of the year could look so warm. I made tea, wore my favorite shawl, and thought about the message I'd received from Henry the evening before. "Can I come by around 3? I think I know a way to help with the next chapter." A way to help with the next chapter. Those words felt like a promise sewn with thread of gold. By mid-afternoon, my little home was filled with the sound of scritching pen on paper, the quiet hum of the kettle, and Henry's soft, thoughtful voice as he offered ideas. "We should open with something tangible," he said, his eyes bright, despite the mild arthritis that made his fingers stiff. "People connect with places. Start with the warehouse, your first shelter. Make them feel the cold, the smell, the ache in your bones. Then take them into the warmth you built." I nodded, sipping tea. His suggestion wasn't new exactly, but it reminded me why I was writing, not for myself, but for the countless others who might find their courage in my words. "You're good at this," he said, as though reading my thoughts. "Only because I lived it," I replied. He smiled without ego. We built a structure, drafting paragraph after paragraph, laying out scenes that felt cinematic yet deeply intimate. Not dramatic for drama's sake, but honest in its ache and hope. By the time Henry left, I had a first draft of the opening chapter, my journey from the warehouse to the sewing classes, from rejection to purpose. I read it aloud, and the words sounded like testimony. Raw, coherent, human. That night, I heated soup and curled up in my chair with the notebook open on my lap. I wrote, I learned that a door left ajar is not a sign of weakness, it is an invitation. I paused, letting that sink in, because that was what the world had given me. A door left ajar, not even wide open, but not closed either. Not a welcome, but a possibility. Midnight came and went. I didn't mind. Words were flowing, and good ones did not wait for permission. The next morning brought a knock, gentle but insistent. I opened the door to find Joy, bundled in a thick coat, cheeks reddened by cold. I'm sorry to bother you, she said, her voice warm, but I baked too much again, and she held out a plate of brownies, that glorious, unapologetic offering of chocolate and kindness. I laughed. They weren't my favorite, but it was the gesture that counted. We sat at my small kitchen table, tea steaming between us. I wanted to ask you something, she said, nibbling on the corner of a brownie. Yes? I prompted. Well, you've helped so many people, and I've been thinking maybe we should start a support group, a space for people who've lost everything to build something again, not just sewing classes, but conversation, story sharing, healing. I felt a spark. Tell me more, I said, and so she told me. Joy had seen isolation destroy more dreams than winter ever had. She knew loneliness like a second language. She believed, as I did, that people needed more than warm jackets, they needed warm hearts and shared space. By the time she left, we had sketched out a plan. Threads of Hope, a weekly gathering for anyone who needed a hand, a stitch, or simply a listening ear. The weeks that followed were full of activity. Flyers were printed. Rooms were reserved at the community center. Camille helped set up a small donation fund for refreshments and paper supplies. Even Eric, yes, Eric showed up early one morning to help set chairs and carry tables. Not with fanfare or boasting, just quietly, steady, like a man trying to be better. And when the first meeting of Threads of Hope was called to order, the room filled not with emptiness, but with presence. There were familiar faces, Tasha and her young son, Javier in his neat denim jacket, Brenda with her famous cornbread recipe tucked in her purse. There were strangers, too, people whose eyes carried the same quiet ache I once knew so well. I stood before them and felt neither fear nor doubt, just clarity. Welcome, I said, voice steady and warm, not because you've arrived, but because you showed up. And in that moment, I understood something fundamental. Healing begins when you acknowledge the hurt, not hide it. We shared stories, stitched together beginnings and endings, and by the time the meeting ended, hands were entwined in hugs, laughter, and tears. Not the end of pain, but the start of healing. That night, as snow fell once more, this time light and hopeful, I sat by my window, knitting a simple scarf for a neighbor who had lost her gloves. The world outside shimmered like a promise. I wrote one last line in my notebook before turning in. Asterisk. We are not healed when the pain leaves us. We are healed when we learn to feel worthy in spite of it. It wasn't perfect, but it was true. And sometimes, that is more than enough. The early morning air was crisp, the first real bite of winter that seemed to whisper, "You've grown into this." I watched from my kitchen window as the sun rose slowly, pieces of gold cutting through the white that blanketed the world. It felt poetic, somehow an echo of all the seasons I had lived through, each one teaching me something I didn't know I needed. But this one felt like redemption. I was finishing my morning tea when the knock came. It wasn't urgent, not loud, just steady like someone who had felt welcomed before and hoped I would still be there. When I opened the door, I saw faces that had traveled quietly with me through this long winter of soul and survival. Joy, her eyes warm with mornings full of shared stories. Tasha, holding her son's hand. Dana, with her gentle smile. Even Henry, bearing mugs of hot coffee for everyone. And behind them, standing tall even in the cold, was Eric. His eyes met mine, not with desperation, not with pleading, but with something steadier, honest. Today wasn't about past wounds. Today was about now, a moment that wasn't echoing yesterday's pain or tomorrow's fear. We stood outside my little home, the snow settling around us like a quiet audience, as neighbors, friends, and familiar faces gathered bundled in coats, holding scarves and hope like lanterns. There was laughter, greetings, friendly chatter full of warmth and inevitability, like a small wave of community rising up around one humble door. And when I spoke, my voice was clear, steady, certain. "Thank you," I began, "for standing here with me, not because this is an end to every struggle, but because it is a beginning." I could feel eyes shining back, some wet with emotion, some bright with encouragement, all anchored in presence and shared humanity. "Today isn't about what once broke us," I continued. "It's about what we chose to build. Not just walls or homes, but connection, dignity, and warmth inside ourselves and each other." A hush settled so gentle it felt like everyone was taking a breath together, as if absorbing not just my words, but the full implication of them. There, in that quiet morning, under the soft snow and growing winter light, I felt something profound settle in my chest, not a warmth that banished cold, but one that acknowledged it and stood firm anyway. Then, as though it had been waiting for the right moment, someone gently played a soft melody on a violin, a neighbor who had come to live with us not long ago, one who listened and learned and healed in little steps. The music wove through the air like a thread of gold, rich and grounded and beautiful. People smiled, tears welled, breaths fogged the cold. None of us said a word for a good long while. After the music, as people began to disperse, some chatting in small clusters about winter plans and sewing circles, Camille approached me with a gentle look. "Tonight," she whispered, "the publishing team is holding a small dinner in your honor. The first copy of the Sunday letters arrives tomorrow." The joy in her words wasn't loud, it didn't need to be, but it was deep, like roots holding firm beneath winter soil. I nodded, swept with gratitude. Then, as everyone began to move toward their own small celebrations, my gaze found Eric standing there, shoulders relaxed, eyes honest. He approached slowly, like he was offering not an explanation, not a plea, but something steadier: presence. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet but sincere, "for letting me back into this community, and for not letting the past be the final word." I didn't offer a speech. I offered a nod, firm, direct, unwavering. "Let's keep walking," I said gently, "toward what comes next, not back to what was." And as he stood beside me, among friends, beneath the gentle snow and brightening sky, something simple as breath and warmth and possibility I understood. The path forward isn't about fixing every wound. It's about continuing the journey, step by step, breath by breath, with light still burning in the window. Later that night, after dinner and laughter and the first celebratory pages of the Sunday letters laid out in print yellowed with hope, I sat by my window. The snow had softened into silence. I sipped tea, notebook open, pen in hand. I wrote one last line for this chapter, the final thought before something new. We are not here because the storm stopped. We are here because we stood in it and chose to rise. And somewhere beyond the window, snowflakes fell slow and steady, as if answering the truth of it. Because sometimes the most powerful warmth isn't the absence of cold, but the steadfast choice to keep the hearth glowing in the midst of it. The door was no longer just ajar. It was wide open. The story teaches us that true strength is not about avoiding hardship, but about choosing dignity and compassion in the face of betrayal and loss. It reminds us that forgiveness is not forgetting the past, but reclaiming our voice and purpose despite it. In the quiet resilience of one woman's journey, we see that healing is possible not through grand gestures, but through small, steady acts of courage, kindness, and the choice to keep the door open just enough for hope to walk back in.